welcome back to the 1% Show. If you're new here, tune in to hear me spin the yarns with authors, savants, and eccentric humans every week. Today on the 1% Show,
I had a document that I printed out indicating that I had typed 83 words per minute at age 6 and 108 words per minute at age 10. This was noticed a lot when I went into elementary school. I don't think anything will ever become obsolete. I don't even think typing on typewriters will become obsolete. Okay, here's a weird, unrelated example.
You also have a keen interest in Scrabble, is that correct?
I was the youngest player in the history of that group, breaking the record of Robert Slavin, who later went on to become a 5-time Jeopardy champion, but he wasn't a great Scrabble player, and neither was I.
I'm your Aussie host Brandon Nankivell, and it's time to kick back and enjoy the show. Let's go. You can get a free audiobook by signing up for a 30-day trial. Head to brandonnankovell.com/audible. That's Brandon, B-R-A-N-D-O-N, Nankivell, N-A-N-K-I-V-E-L-L. Again, that's brandonnankovell.com/audible. I use Audible on the daily and have been for months. I use Audible to integrate reading into my daily activities like my morning walk, cooking food, and driving my car. You can do the same. Now, to be sure that Amazon doesn't bite my ass, I have to tell you guys that the 1% Show has no affiliation with Amazon. All proceeds will go directly into my pocket so I can buy myself a cup of coffee. Thanks guys, and head to brandonnankovell.com/audible to sign up for your 30-day trial and get a free audiobook.
Alright, let's do it, Sean. So, to the listeners listening in, today we've got a very exciting guest on the podcast, and that is Sean Wrona, widely considered to be the fastest typist in the world, which is why I'm so excited to talk to you, Sean. So, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Brandon.
So, I've got a few questions for you, Sean. Quite a few here. I'm extremely curious, and I'm wondering, when did you first learn to touch type, if that's what you even do? I'm not sure how you type, but I'd love to know when you started and got into the competitive typing scene.
Well, competitive typing scene is something different, but I don't really remember when I learned how to type. I usually say I was 3 years old. I spent a lot of time on the computer in my youth when I was 2 or 3 years old, in an era when most parents in the U.S. didn't allow their kids to use computers. That was considered déclassé or something among most of the middle class at the time. My mom was disabled with multiple sclerosis. She had not been diagnosed yet. And so I ended up spending a lot of time at home. I did not go out like most of the other kids did. So I would either go on the computer or I would draw a map of my fictional planet Susphere. I just stuck an S in the name Sean in the middle of the word super, I guess. It was probably influenced by Calvin and Hobbes or something like that. I didn't really have any real friends or anything, so I made up a bunch of imaginary friends. My main imaginary friend was Michael Collins, who I guess I named after the astronaut who didn't walk on the moon in Apollo 11 or something. I spent a lot of time looking at world almanacs and stuff. I devoured them for statistical information. I spent a lot of time playing with my mom's calculator, memorized the powers of 2 all the way up to 67,108,664.
Wow.
Pressed almost every button on the scientific calculator numerous times. So they had memorized pi and e and stuff without having a clue what they were. I also went through my parents' computer manuals and stuff, DOS manuals. There was a time when I had memorized the date, time, and file size of every DOS application. I built huge directory structures in DOS, created and deleted tons of directories. I apparently deleted some of my mom's databases and stuff. I experimented by doing really bad stuff like deleting command.com and my parents were at some point afraid I was going to format the hard drive, so they changed the name of the format application to 5MAT. I didn't get the pun at all, but I had memorized the date, time, and file size, so I knew it was the same program. But at that point, I had enough sense not to format the hard drive. So anyway, I probably spent most of my time on the computer even before I was in preschool, but my parents had a touch typing program called CPT Personal Touch Typing. Now, I've been doing a lot of research, like I said, for a book that I'm interested in writing about the history of competitive typing. I don't know whether I'm going to do this or not, but I've been collecting a lot of research about a lot of the old applications and a lot of the old stars of the typing scene going back to the typewriting era. And so I was looking up a lot of information about this program. CPT was apparently a company that made word processors and continued doing so well into the personal computer age. But obviously, anything related to computers is going to put anything related to word processors out of business, and they went out of business in 1992. Now, strangely, this company, CPT, which was one of the most successful word processor companies out of Minnesota, they had this typing application for the IBM DOS PC and all the compatible PCs at that time. So my parents had this application, CPT Personal Touch Typing. It wasn't as famous as Mavis Beacon. It actually came out earlier. CPT came out in 85. Mavis Beacon came out in 87. But this program didn't endure, but it was okay. Nothing compared to typing sites today. I apparently used this when I was 2 or 3. I don't really remember when I started using it, but I do have a couple of papers that I printed out and put on my website indicating that I typed. I will have to look this up on my website. I don't remember the first typing speed. Okay, I had a document that I printed out indicating that I had typed 83 words per minute at age 6 and 108 words per minute at age 10. This was faster than anybody in my elementary school. And this was noticed a lot when I went into elementary school. My second grade teachers had me type up a poetry book of all the students' contributions, and including my own, every single second grade student. They didn't have the secretaries or whatever do that. They had me do it. I was very unbalanced and about as nerdy as it is possible to be, as everybody's already seen on the typing videos. At the time I was in elementary school, I spent so much time on the math and computers and looking up stuff and no time socializing at all. And so at the time I started in elementary school, I was in occupational therapy, speech therapy, adaptive physical education, speech therapy. I had a heavy speech impediment, resource and counseling. I was in basically all the special ed courses they had, and I rode a special school bus as well. So I had this weird thing where my academic abilities were well noticed, but my social inabilities were just as well noticed. But actually considering that, I was more or less accepted, more accepted than you'd think in that era in school. A lot of people were impressed by my typing abilities. My rapid arithmetic abilities were for some reason noticed more, even though they were substantially less elite. Even into middle school and high school, people would ask me to do arithmetic problems, usually 2x2 multiplication problems in the high school hallways. I don't think most of them were making fun of me. Probably a few were, but I would usually answer these questions for people within 10 seconds, and that's what inspired people more, even though it was substantially less impressive. There are a lot of people who are a lot better lightning calculators than I ever was, but I didn't have any clue that my typing was that elite until I was out of grad school, basically. After we switched to Windows 95 or whatever, which wasn't immediately in 95, I didn't have a lot of money growing up, and I only had computers for much of my childhood because my uncle, who was one of the chief assistants to the head of the computer science department at the University of Maryland, he always sent us his old computers for most of my childhood. I was no longer using DOS applications at the time. I was no longer using typing applications all the time. I figured I was fine at typing and I didn't really need to anymore, but obviously I was still improving, even though I wasn't trying to. My father had a typing application. My parents were divorced at this time. So when I was at my father's apartment, he had a different typing application. I don't remember what it was, but I was about 16 at that time, and I was frequently hitting 199 words per minute on it. The game maxed at 199 words per minute. You could not get 200 on that game, but I did get 199, not infrequently on that. So clearly I was already hitting 200 at the time. Clearly most of my improvement was between when I was 10 and when I was in 16. I wasn't even trying to improve or practicing or anything, but I just did. And so when people ask me how I learned to improve, it seems like most of my improvement was done at a time I wasn't even paying attention to it. When I actually discovered the online typing scene, which was a lot later than it actually started, the first site that still exists, Hyper A, came out in about 2002, and some of the people who I do remember from my early years, like Eric Chung and Jelani Nelson, were on it very early in 2002 to 2004 or whatever. They were on it right in the beginning, but I didn't discover any of this stuff until it was either 2008 or 2009. My high school classmate, Jordan Knott, who was my Facebook friend at the time, used this Facebook typing speed application, and I discovered it on his news feed or whatever, and followed the link to the application. It was a 30-second test of basic words, almost all in lowercase, from the most frequent, 1,000, 2,000 words in English. The application no longer exists. None of the Facebook-only applications seem to exist. Even TypeRacer had a Facebook presence. It doesn't anymore. There were a lot of games on Facebook that were either derivatives of 10 Fast Fingers or derivatives of TypeRacer. I think 10 Fast Fingers and TypeRacer were the first sites, but they predated me, so I'm not entirely sure. They are the oldest of the sites. Well, actually, TypeArray is older than 10 Fast Fingers. 10 Fast Fingers is a lot more popular. Anyway, Facebook typing speed was a TypeArray 10 Fast Fingers style game that only went for 30 seconds instead of a minute or two like those games, where you typed among the most frequent words in English, and it had a daily leaderboard every day where it listed the top 20 users each day, and I found out I was leading it a lot of the days. It was either me or Jelani Nelson. We kind of alternated, and we fiercely competed too. We'd bump our scores throughout the day. We were almost always first and second in some order. Eric Chung and Jordan Woodruff were fairly close behind, usually in a battle for third. There were a lot of other people I don't remember. But that was the scene as it was. Dan Chen must have been on there a lot because he was one of the leading American stars at the time. The closest thing Jelani had to a rival, but Jelani was better than Dan. So from there were a lot of people who started sending me Facebook private messages and inviting me to a bunch of other sites, none of which I'd even heard about or were aware existed. Jelani himself told me about the Ultimate Typing Championship in Austin, Texas in March of 2010, which is what I became most famous for. That video with 6 million views, more than I ever wanted to see on that. And yes, Jelani told me about that contest, and then in preparation for that, I decided I wanted to practice on basically all the sites. I went on everything pretty hardcore. In December of 2009, TypeRacer and Typing Zone and Typer A and Eurocore, which was a Russian site that was very little used, but actually one of the better ones. Hi-games.net, and probably I was on 10 Fast Fingers too, although I think I joined that one a little later. I basically went on all the typing sites in December 2009 and pretty much setting the English language records on most of them. It took me a little longer to get the English language record on TypeRacer. Jelani and I kept bumping each other's TypeRacer records for a while, and neither of us was the first to get 200. Noah Horn was the first to get 200 on TypeRacer. He got a 213 race in like his fourth attempt or something, but he had a heavily lagged race. There used to be something that happened where you could sometimes get races that started out where you had over thousands or even tens of thousands sometimes words per minute to start. That no longer exists on TypeRacer, but it was a weird quirk at the time. I recall a couple times I had races that started at 30,000 words per minute or something. So it was probably something like that that gave Noah his 213. The first 200 that was accepted as a 200 was by Guillermo Sandrini, who calls himself Cocaine on there, Kukkain. I'm sure you've seen him all over the place. He had what is generally regarded as the first 200 that was presumably actually a 200. He's considered probably the best verse typist out there, better than me, although he hasn't broken my TypeRacer high speed record when a few others have, which is kind of surprising. But he dominates the short text untyping zone. But Jelani and I eventually beat his type racer records and then started competing with each other ferociously. He got a 232 and I got a 247, I believe is how it worked. And after that, he basically stopped competing on typing sites except for the Intersteno Internet Championship each year, which he still competes in. Jelani ended up not going to the Ultimate Typing Championship because, well, first they ruled him ineligible because he was apparently born in the Virgin Islands and they were only looking for people who were born in the 50 U.S. states or the District of Columbia. They were going to let him compete anyway, but Jelani said he decided he didn't want to because he didn't want them to use his image as much as it looked like they were going for. So he decided to drop out. So that left me and Dan Chen among the stars at the time. Dan Chen, whose birth name was Yifei Chen, Yifei, but he usually called himself Dan on most sites. He was a just out of Harvard student. Oh, and Jelani Nelson was at MIT for a while there. Almost all the big stars. And Eric Chung was at Stanford and Noah Yehorn was at Yale. It was almost comical how almost every one of the big stars was at some really elite college. I mean, I was at Cornell, which was like the worst of them, compared to everybody else. Dan was pretty close to me in speed at the time, probably about 5 or 10 words per minute slower. But he had just gotten a big, high-powered financial job. I don't remember where, in New York City, somewhere. I can look at his LinkedIn right now, which I did just look at a few days ago. I've been doing a lot of research on a lot of people, which probably will help for this interview. Dan Chen, straight out of Harvard, was working for Citigroup in 2009, and it was a really high-powered job, and they did not let him have the time off to compete in this contest. So ended up falling to Nate Bowen, who was not somebody most of the rest of us had ever heard of. Nate was on the Facebook version of Type Array, but he wasn't on any of the other sites. He spent almost all his time on the Ultimate Typing Championship site itself, which was called TyperX, TYPRX, and he felt that practicing only there would be the most effective way to practice. I felt that competing on every site would help you on every other site. I believe I was right. I don't think Nate probably wasn't typing when he was 3 anyway, and I don't think either of our practice methods really would have decided that because I beat him by so much there, and unfortunately because of everything I said there, everybody ended up thinking in that contest that I was some kind of arrogant hothead when most people who really know me know how self-loathing I really am, and I felt that video edited me in a way that didn't really reflect who I was, but I probably shouldn't be saying that so publicly, but anyway, that basically brings you to the main contest, and I may talk about that in a future question. You probably have future questions about that, so I'll stop there and give you a chance to ask another question.
I did, want to ask you about your competitions and contests, and I'm just wondering particularly about being in the public scene. Did that, you must have felt nervous with all this attention on you, so I'm just curious how you managed that.
I was pretty nonchalant. I was pretty well able to tune out the crowd. I mean, it wasn't a huge crowd. There were like 50 people there or something. There, compared to a lot of the other exhibits at South by Southwest, there were a lot of other things that attracted a lot more people there. The dust keyboard salesman talking in the background may have been more of a distraction, but he wasn't really much of a distraction either. I can really get in the zone typing. I am on the autistic spectrum. I learned that more recently. In 2014, I was diagnosed for Asperger's, so that probably is connected to the intense focus I have. I am pretty good at tuning out ambient noise or whatever when typing. I mean, you've possibly also seen some of my videos where I've actually talked simultaneously while typing and haven't really been any slower than my natural speed. Mm-hmm. That's apparently not common, although I think I know some other people who could do it, but I wasn't really bothered by the crowds or anything. I was in the zone. I mean, perhaps too much in the zone. Perhaps that's what caused that handshake fail everybody now makes fun of, but I don't really remember a lot about that day itself. I did unofficially break the Guinness PC typing record over a 3-minute interval. Greg Arakelian at the Keytronic type-off in Las Vegas. It had a much longer name than that. I don't remember the name of it, but that was probably the biggest typing prize in history. Eric Helian did not win the contest, but he won the semifinal round with a speed of 158 words per minute over 3 minutes. He lost the final round to Wayne Stoller. This was in 1990 or 1991. I don't remember which year. I think it was 1991. Stoller won the contest and won a $10,000 cash prize. I believe that's the largest cash prize in the history of typing. Mine was only $2,000. And the typewriting contest in the 20s, 30s, 40s almost had to have had lower prizes than that, I would think. But it seems like a lot of people in this generation are a lot faster than the people in that generation at touch typing. A lot of us started younger, started on computers before we were 10, and Wayne Stoller probably didn't. Wayne Stoller is on the Typing Zone list, actually, but he's in the 200s on it. I think he probably only did it once rather than a bunch of times like the rest of us did, but it seems like the millennials in general are a lot faster on typing on a PC than the baby boomers were. It wasn't just me. A lot of people set higher PC standards, I think. But don't get me wrong, Stoller and Eric Helian were also really good. What was most impressive about Eric Helian's record, which I just looked at today, like I said, I'm doing research for a book, and I'm looking at all the old typing records. Just yesterday, in fact, I went to the downtown Syracuse library and signed out all the Guinness Books of World Records they had from 1991 to 2013. I'm amazed that since they're reference books and they let me sign out and all of them simultaneously, I was amazed by that.
Wow.
Most of the later ones don't have a lot of information about typing in them. After 1998, they more or less stopped caring about typing records. They'll occasionally print a typing record, but a lot of them aren't really things that most people would care about. The one they seem to obsess over in recent years, the one they share the most, is about this guy who typed the words 1 to a million, not the numbers, the words 1 to a million over a period of several years. And I don't know why they were so obsessed with this, but I don't think it's a particularly interesting record. And they also have all these things about fastest typing on a smartphone and texting and fastest typing of the alphabet with A through Z typing, spaces in between all the words. Now, I know a lot of people on Typing Zone who type the alphabet faster than that, at a word per minute rate. But they don't have certified Guinness records. To have a certified record, you have to have somebody in front of you certifying it. Now, that's, I think, what kind of breaks down about the Guinness Book of World Records a lot. There are probably lots of people who break records who just don't have the wherewithal to get to a certified location or get somebody to come over to watch them or spend all that money to do that or whatever. So while the old Guinness Book of World Records, the typewriting records were legitimate, and the records set at the Keytronic contest in Las Vegas were probably legitimate for that time, although there were a lot of people who are typing faster than that now. The more recent Guinness typing records, what they choose to focus on and the validity of it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because it seems like the current Guinness World Record holder wouldn't even make the top 50 on the Typing Zone list. There are a lot of us who are faster, including me. I'm not the fastest at typing the alphabet. Christophe Jusseline of France holds that record, but lots of people ask why I'm not in the Guinness Book or whatever. I don't really understand what the Guinness Book is doing about typing. I mean, they took most of their typing records off the book. I saw in the 1989 edition, there's a really weird line they have here in the 1989 book that I don't even understand. I'm looking this up right now. Records on electric and computer-driven typewriters cannot be compared with any accuracy. I don't know what on earth they're talking about there, especially because they accepted all those records at that Keytronic contest just a few years later. I don't really know what they're doing, so I take the online records a lot more seriously than I take their supposedly official records, except for the typewriter records of the past. Albert Tangora was obviously a legend, typing 147 words per minute on a mechanical typewriter, including errors in the 1940s, in over an hour. That is huge, obviously. And the typewriting contests were very official in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Those are legitimate. The PC records, there haven't been a whole lot of legitimate PC contests, I guess, and that's the issue here. I don't see why there haven't been, but that's the deal. So as far as PCs are concerned, there are a lot of people who are a lot faster at all sorts of things than what you'll see in Guinness, and they don't even list typing records a lot of the time. They're more obsessed with texting records now, and texting seems to be doing much bigger business. Austin Wierski won $50,000 back-to-back years for winning a texting contest sponsored by LG. There's never been any typing contest, anything like that, even though there have been a lot more people typing over the years, I'd think, but I don't know, it's kind of strange. But anyway, what was impressive about Eric Keelian's record in particular is that he only had 2 errors over 3 minutes. That's really good. I don't do that very often. So it's possible that his 158 with his small number of errors may have been better than my 163. I don't know. I don't think there were videos taken in the Las Vegas contest. Maybe there wasn't a large crowd and a lot of ambient noise in his contest. Well, there was in mine, but his record was probably comparable to mine for its time, but I do think I improved a lot in 2011 and 2012 after that. I think I peaked in the summer of 2012 on Type Racer, especially on Typing Zone, and I was still very new to the competitive typing scene when I won that contest in Austin. As I said, I didn't really join most of the sites until December 2009. This was March of 2010. This was 3 months later. So I did probably peak in 2011 or 2012 later than that, at which point I was probably a lot better. There were a lot of people who beat me in early 2010 who suddenly weren't in 2011 and 2012 when I got more experience typing those quotes a lot of times. It probably wasn't until 2011 or 2012 that I'd maximized my potential, although I don't think I can really go higher than I went then. And I think I've declined a few words per minute since then.
I mean, Sean, you're somewhat of a savant. I'm just Googling the term now, but I believe you did mention a bit earlier that you're on the autistic spectrum, and then I'm hearing all these things with your amazing talent and your amazing speeds and what you've done in school to, you were the typing guy, you helped everyone out, and at the age of 6, I forgot how fast you type, but extremely fast. And a savant, the definition according to Google, is apparently a learned person, especially a distinguished scientist. So that seems like a very broad term. But have you ever been considered to be a savant by other people?
I don't really remember if people threw that word around a lot. I don't think many people use that word with me.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I don't know. It seems like it's such a broad definition, but either way, your typing skills are somewhat, out of this world, considering at the age you were typing so fast. So I'm just, again, sitting here in awe. It's just amazing to hear all these things. So I do have a couple more questions here, and I'm wondering, what keyboard are you using right now out of interest?
At the moment, I am using a Logitech illuminated keyboard K740, not particularly special, something about it Office Depot. The DOS keyboard I was using wore out. I don't really have huge preferences between keyboards. I think the DOS keyboard may have been a couple words per minute faster, or I may have slowed down a little, or it may be that there were so many new quotes added on Type Racer that's what made me look like I slowed down a little. I don't really know. The DOS keyboard definitely felt better. I'm not sure it was much faster than cheaper ones. I think it's always more about the typist than about the keyboard. The one exception with that is some people specialize on desktop keyboards, some people specialize on laptop keyboards, and when you specialize in one and when you try to type in the other, you're way slower. I'm not the fastest on typing on a laptop keyboard at all. I'm probably 20 words per minute slower or something on laptops, and they aren't comfortable for me, but there are people who are nearly matching my speed among the more recent Type Racer users. I think Eric Trider, Shazzy especially, is known for his ridiculous laptop speed. But if you put him on a desktop keyboard, he'd probably be substantially slower too. So I don't think the specific type of desktop or laptop keyboard matters, but desktop keyboard versus laptop keyboard matters a lot, and that can be a lot to adjust to. But if you master desktop keyboards, you master laptop keyboards, you'll probably master all kinds of different desktop or laptop keyboards and have similar speeds on each.
I see. I also want to ask you about typing layouts. Now, I don't know how to pronounce them, but Dvorak and Colmac. So I'm just wondering what they are and whether you think it's worth relearning.
Dvorak was a layout that was founded by August Dvorak in 1936, and the idea behind that keyboard was to place the most frequently typed letters on the center row, on the home row, so you would, in theory, move your hands around less often and thereby type more quickly. I'm not sure it is at all faster because the only person I've really heard about setting really huge marks on Dvorak is Barbara Blackburn, who is one of the listed Guinness World Record holders for typing 150 words per minute on an IBM Selectric keyboard over 50 minutes. That's why I typed on highgames.net for 50 minutes and typed 174 words per minute. I don't know whether typing 174 words per minute on a modern computer keyboard or 150 words per minute on a IBM Selectric typewriter or 147 words per minute on a mechanical typewriter over an hour is more impressive. They're probably similar. I mean, obviously I'd be slower on both of those. Obviously they'd be much better than me on a typewriter or than I would be. I was very slow on a typewriter the times I tried. I wasn't pushing the keys hard enough. I was very slow. I think they would be better able to adapt to do what I do on a computer keyboard than vice versa. But I'm not sure which of the most impressive feats those are. But Blackburn is really the only person I've heard about setting records on Dvorak. Most others were on QWERTY. Dvorak may be better on your hands, maybe better at you not getting carpal tunnel syndrome or something. I've never had carpal tunnel because I generally type smoothly enough that I don't type in an abrasive manner except when I'm trying to type for high speed records, which isn't over very short text. That isn't very fun to do, but I've been trying to do that again because my 256 words per minute on TypeRacer has been broken by several people now, and several others have gotten close on very short text. I'm not the best burst typist. It's just that I slow down less than everybody else as a race goes on. Kathy Chang just got 276 words per minute on a very short quote from the Beatles' Yellow Submarine on TypeRacer. I haven't done better than like 253 on that quote yet, although I've typed it substantially fewer times. So I'm trying to get my records up, but it's not very fun typing like that. And that's the kind of typing that can give you carpal tunnel, I think, if you're trying to type faster than your natural speed. Now, my natural speed is 176 all the time. I can type like that day in, day out and do nothing to my wrists at all. So I think the only issue with carpal tunnel is if you are trying to type above your ability all the time. Just don't do that. But Dvorak may be better at not giving you carpal tunnel syndrome since the most frequently used keys are on the middle row, the second most frequently used keys are on the top row, and the least frequently used keys are on the bottom row generally. But I'm not at all sure it's faster, since I think you can adapt to anything more or less equally, whether it's Dvorak, Colmac, or QWERTY. And Colmac was basically the keyboard that bridged between the two. I had never heard of Colmac until I was doing all these contests recently. Colmac moved some of the keys on the QWERTY keyboard to the Dvorak positions, but not others, I believe. I believe it was a compromise between the two layouts or something like that. I'll have to look at the Colmac, if it's on here even. Yes, the Colmac does do what I said it did. It keeps some of the QWERTY keys in the QWERTY position, and it keeps some of the Dvorak keys in the Dvorak position, although it seems to move most around. But it still follows the Dvorak ideas of putting the most frequently used characters in the center row, although it differs a little on what those characters are. In fact, Colmac does a more accurate job of putting the most frequently used letters of the English language in the center row, because I know that I've read in books that the most frequently used letters in the English language are in order something like ETAINOSHRD or something, and those are exactly the 10 keys, although not in that order, on the center row of the Colmac keyboard. So it was obviously designed for that in mind. There are very few people using Colmac, and I haven't heard of anybody setting typing records on it. But, I mean, I think anybody, if they were starting out at age 3 or something, anybody could attain the same speeds I do probably on any of these layouts. I don't think the layout really matters much as the experience does. Most people who learn about Dvorak or Colmac do so later in life, so that's probably why there have been fewer people coming close to setting records on these. I think you could be just as fast in anything if you had the experience I did or something. I mean, I don't know much about those keyboards, and I don't think it's really worth it to switch if you're already fast on QWERTY. It would take you a year or more to maybe catch up to your QWERTY speed, and I don't know of a lot of people who really exceed what they do in QWERTY if they're good to begin with on QWERTY. If you're just starting out, if you're really slow and you might want to change, but if you're fast, even as fast as you are on TypeRacer, I probably wouldn't recommend it. That's about all I have to say there.
Right on. So I know before the podcast, you did say you struggled to sort of explain how it is that you type so fast, but if there were 3 tips for slower typists on how to type faster, so if they're writing a blog post or they're writing a book and they want to type faster, what would those 3 tips be, do you reckon?
Do not type every word with uniform speed. That is probably the biggest thing. You want to type the shorter words, the more basic words faster, and you want to type the more difficult words slower, and you want to type capital letters and punctuation and obviously things you're going to likely make typos on. You want to type those a little slower than plain lowercase letters. Typing at a constant rate or trying to do that is exactly something you don't want to do. I don't know a lot about the home row method because, obviously the CPT program I use sort of train that way, and I don't think I deviate from home row all that much. Some people seem to be shocked by the fact that I type different letters with the same letter with different fingers sometimes, but it seems to me obvious, and I think that's what almost everybody who is elite does. They type based on the context of the letters in the word, but you may just have to see it, have enough experience typing to just be able to do that in your head, so that you can just think to slightly move your hands over away from home row. I don't know if there are people who return to home row after every single word they type. That's definitely something you don't want to do. That may be something some people encourage you to do, but you definitely want to move to at least somewhere between the expected home row position and the opening letters of the next word you're going to type in advance, if you know what you're typing in advance. So those are probably the 2 biggies. Type shorter and easier words faster. Type more difficult words more slowly. Don't try to type at the same speed. That's the first thing. The second thing is not to always go by the book home row. You may have to reach a certain level of proficiency to deviate from it. I don't know, but if there are people who are returning their hands to home row after every word or after every sentence or something, that's obviously slower than if you try to position your hands closer to where the next word you're going to have to type is. And this is going to be a new one that I haven't talked about a lot. I just did some research on TypeRacer. TypeRacer lists the number of milliseconds it takes for every person to type every character in their logs, which the moderators can see. It's designed to see who is cheating and who is not. The easiest way to tell somebody's cheating is if they type a bunch of characters in a row in less than 5 milliseconds or something. That's one of the most obvious ways people cheat, because nobody types that fast in reality. But it's also probably a great way at analyzing how a lot of different people type, and several of the TypeRacer people who are moderators, like Michael DeRoche, who you already interviewed, he spends a lot of time looking at the logs to try and understand how the fastest typists type and how their typing styles differ and stuff, and I've been starting to learn a lot of that stuff myself. So I went into Microsoft Excel and slowly copied all the elite typist keystrokes to see who was the fastest on each key, and the order that people typed keys from the fastest to the slowest, and all kinds of stuff like that. And it seems like most people on the QWERTY keyboard type the spacebar, the H, the O, the N, and the I fastest. The lowercase version of those characters, obviously. And those characters are in the top 7 or 8 for almost every QWERTY typist. The spacebar is probably the most frequent key that is the fastest typed by most of the fastest typists. My biggest advantage on TypeRacer is apparently the speed at which I type the spacebar. I type the spacebar on average at a rate of 240 words per minute. That is the fastest anybody on that site types on any key, I believe. One of the other fastest typists on TypeRacer, Izzy, who you've probably seen there, who is almost at my level of speed. A lot of months, only 2 or 3 words per minute behind me. Izzy only types the spacebar apparently at 180 words per minute. It's not his fastest key. In fact, the difference in our spacebar speeds is probably enough to make the difference between me being faster than Izzy and not. And that was kind of a big surprise to me and to him when I revealed that on the Type Racer Discord chat room a month or two ago. And so obviously a big key to being fast is how quickly you type the spacebar, because the spacebar is the key you're going to be typing the most, more than any other key, more than any letter. And so it's the most frequent key, and it's one of the fastest keys for most of the fastest people, and it seems to be where I have my biggest advantage. So I guess my third piece of advice would be to focus on getting your spacebar speed up and mastered, because that appears to be the most important key on the keyboard by far. And if you master, like, always typing the same way, always typing with the same thumb or whatever, and focusing on avoiding errors by spacing one character too early or too late, which is my most frequent error, which is no surprise based on how quickly I type the space bar. That could lead to big improvements probably for a lot of typists, since, I mean, it's the easiest key to hit. Most people will probably only be using one thumb to hit it, and it has the potential for a lot of people, I think, to be the fastest key on the keyboard and the most frequent key to type. So, focusing a lot on the space bar is probably a good place to start. And that's something I just discovered very recently, like a month ago when I was looking at these logs. I guess that would be my third piece of advice now.
Wow, yeah, it's just incredible to hear, you're still learning. It's like learning never stops. You always find something new. And I've been stuck at 127 words per minute for years, but I've never, all these, yeah, thank you. I think like the overall average for people in the world is like 37 words per minute. I could be wrong. I don't know if you know anything about that.
I've read that it's about 40. I mean, even on Type Racer it's about 40, and I don't think Type Racer is a randomly selected audience at all either, although it is getting to be quite a mainstream site. I'm surprised how popular this has become, actually, considering how it gets almost no attention outside of the typing sites. On Alexa.com, which ranks the most popular sites on the internet, I believe that Type Racer, 10 Fast Fingers, and Nitro Type are all in the top 50,000 most popular sites on the internet. I really didn't think that this would be that big, especially considering you don't hear anybody really outside of the scene talking about it much at all. There's no press coverage anymore. I mean, the Ultimate Typing Championship, although there was a lot of, way too many people saw that internet video, admittedly, but only my hometown Ithaca Journal. I was living in Ithaca at the time. I'm now living in Syracuse, New York. I was living in Ithaca a couple years after graduating at Cornell, which is in Ithaca. I lived off campus for a number of years. The Ithaca Journal was the only newspaper to pick up the 2010 contest up. Robert Price, who was one of my favorite people to race on the early years of Type Racer, who won the 2013 contest in Cincinnati using a totally different kind of keyboard that I was unable to adapt to. I competed in the semifinals of the Cincy Typing Challenge in 2013, and I was easily faster than anybody else there. I was brought in as a ringer. We typed on a regular keyboard at the time. That's where I also typed on a regular typewriter. It was like the 150th anniversary or the 125th anniversary of the first, I think it was the 125th anniversary of the first typewriter contest in the United States, which was also held in Cincinnati, and that's what they were celebrating. So they had some antique, old school mechanical typewriters there. I was practicing typing on them, and I was terrible, 30 or 40 words per minute, terrible accuracy, which makes me a lot more impressed with that. Albert Tangora was typing 147 words per minute on that for an hour, which is probably the greatest record ever, although I guess nobody cares about typewriters anymore, and they only care about keyboards or texting, so in that sense, probably nobody has done endurance typing on a computer keyboard like me, or only a couple of people. There may be somebody we've never heard of. It wouldn't surprise me. But anyway, in Cincinnati in 2013, I competed there in the semifinal round, and then we were given the True Grip, which was a prototype of a new keyboard they had introduced, which was a really funky thing that was shaped like a banana, sort of. It was black, and it had some of the keys on one side and some of it on the other. For instance, QWERT would be on the top of the keyboard, and YUIOP would be on the bottom, and it was like that for all the rows. So you typed by having some of your fingers on top of it, the keyboard, and some of it below, and you held it in between like a sandwich or something. I was totally unable to adapt to that. I ended up not being able to make the finals due to a transportation issue. I went back home to Ithaca and couldn't get back to Cincinnati in time. but I would have gotten clobbered because, I mean, you can see how much I struggle even shifting from a mechanical keyboard to not mechanical keyboard, from a desktop keyboard to a laptop keyboard, I lose a lot of speed. From a desktop keyboard to a typewriter, I lose a massive amount of speed. I was unable to get even past, I don't know, maybe 30 words per minute on the True Grip just by having half the keys on the top and half of the keys on the bottom. It was a very specialized skill I mastered, but just change it a slight bit and I'm not even close. Robert Price, who is on the top 100 on the Typing Zone list still, and lives in Cincinnati. So he got to spend a lot of time. I went back home to Ithaca in between. He got to spend a lot of time at the office and talking to people about how to adapt the keyboard to make it work better. And he's also a much better computer programmer and technician than I am. I have a lot of programming experience, but I'm not very good. And he's a lot better at that stuff. And he was a lot better at engineering stuff and figuring out how he was able to get it to work. And he actually broke 100 words per minute typing on that thing at that live contest in Cincinnati. He almost deserved his $5,000 for that. Sure, he's not as fast as I am on a regular QWERTY keyboard. I usually beat him on Type Racer. He beat me sometimes. He was very fun to race there. He was one of the big stars in the early years. He's since moved to Nitro Type almost entirely. But what he did was impressive. I don't remember where I was even starting with Cincinnati. What was the question you asked me?
Hang on, we'll just take an intermission. Sorry, I'm busting to go to the toilet, Sean. I'm really keen. We'll get straight back into it in a few minutes. Is that all right?
Fine.
All right, cool. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back, Sean. So the last question I remember asking was, what are your top 3 tips? But I think I asked something after that, but I can't quite remember now. I've just been so enthralled and my mind's racing because I've got so many more questions to ask you. But
I just remembered the point I was trying to make when I got derailed talking about the Cincinnati contest. Yes, I just got a subscription to newspapers.com to do some research on the history of typing, and like I mentioned, only my hometown paper in Ithaca cared about the Ultimate Typing Championship contest, and about the Cincinnati contest, only the Cincinnati paper picked it up, and they didn't even get Robert Price's name right in the one article they wrote about it. They called him Richard Price. Yet, despite almost no press coverage at all, there are 3 typing sites that are in the top 50,000 on the Alexa World Rankings, which means maybe this is something people should be caring about more than they do. I mean, when Austin Wiersky wins $50,000 twice texting, or maybe it was 25, but it was one or the other, and I mean, that's how I feel on the one hand. On the other hand, I don't exactly want more press coverage considering some of the comments I've already gotten to this point, and some I will no doubt get when this gets uploaded to YouTube or whatever.
Yeah, okay, Sean. So, that's what I wanted to ask, actually. I'm just wondering, do you think typing might eventually become obsolete with the release of this Dragon naturally speaking software where it does speech to words and you can talk the words? And there's also Samsung, I think, that are bringing out this new phone that you can speak into and it does what you command it to without having to press any buttons or type anything. So I'm just wondering if you got any thoughts on that.
I don't think anything will ever become obsolete. I don't even think typing on typewriters will become obsolete. Okay, here's a weird, unrelated example. I enjoyed this movie, this 2007 documentary that came out called The King of Kong, which was about a bunch of people in the early 2000s who were competing about who could set the highest score on classic Donkey Kong in video arcades. This was a game that was mainstream in the 80s that by the time you got to the 2000s, not a whole lot of people cared about, although a lot of poor people ended up caring about that particular record because that movie came out. But even though people considered those sort of video games antique compared to the more modern games that were more hip and more popular now, there was still a contingent of people who are fighting to compete for those records in Donkey Kong, even if it wasn't the most modern game at the time. And there still are. People have broken the records of the 2 main competitors, Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe, in that movie. So I think there will always be people who are going to try to set typing records on keyboards, and there will always be people trying to set typing records on typewriters. One of the problems is that a lot of that stuff isn't really published anymore. Guinness doesn't care about it, so people are less aware of it. But I don't think in that sense anything's going to be obsolete. People will still be competing. Will a lot of people stop typing in favor of voice recognition software? Sure, it will probably become the mainstream thing. People who type slower than 100 words per minute, which is most of the population, will probably mainly be using voice recognition, and it will take off most everywhere. It won't take off everywhere because voice recognition can never be as accurate as typing can. I don't think it's possible for voice recognition or artificial intelligence in general to quite match real human intelligence in this endeavor, although one can always be wrong because everybody thought that computers would never beat people at chess or at Jeopardy or whatever, and that ended up happening. But I think voice recognition, especially in terms of understanding idioms or slang or words that sound similar or interjections or a lot of things, will never be as great as typing or stenotype. So there will still be a demand, but it's going to be a more boutique demand among businesses, probably people who insist you've got to have it right, like lawyers, court stenographers, all that stuff where it has to be completely verbatim. I doubt they are going to go to voice recognition anytime soon, but it will probably be mainstream a lot of other places where things don't have to be that verbatim. So sure, I'm certain there will be a lot fewer people typing, but there will still be people competing to set typing records, I am sure. And there will still be people in the business world using typing. I don't think voice recognition is ever going to get to the point where it is going to be so accurate that it will totally render typing obsolete. People will still be typing both in typing games and in the business world. I can almost guarantee that. But a lot fewer people will be doing so. I can almost guarantee that as well. And the same thing with autonomous self-driving cars. They are presumably going to be mainstream probably by the 2030s or something, but people are still going to be driving. I have no doubt about that. People will still be collecting classic cars, and while I'm a big auto racing fan, and it's one of my other major obsessions. I started 2 auto racing websites, race-database.com, where I archive the complete results of every Formula One top-level NASCAR IndyCar race back to 1979, and every Indy 500 and every 24-hour Le Mans, and a few other prestigious races as well. I stopped keeping up with that site in 2015. I was getting bored with it, and I've lost a lot of interest in racing myself. Almost every racing series is embracing a lot of gimmicks that they didn't do in the past, and a lot of series are a lot tackier than they used to be back in the 90s. I'm still enjoying IndyCar racing a lot. It still has a lot of the elements that are good about F1 and a lot of the elements that are good about NASCAR combined, while F1 and NASCAR got a lot worse. I'm excited about Fernando Alonso, for some reason inexplicable to me, skipping the Monaco Grand Prix this year to compete in the Indy 500. Well, he can probably actually win at Indy while he couldn't in Monaco in the car he was driving. But that tangent aside, it's the same sort of thing. Autonomous cars are probably going to be used by most people who are sick of getting in traffic jams several decades from now. And it'll probably be an improvement all over the place because there's so much distracted driving that goes on. People will finally be able to go on their cell phones while driving and read or watch TV in the car or whatever and not have to worry about crashing. So that would probably be something a lot of people will want to be doing, but there will still be people who are wanting to drive, who enjoy the idea of owning their own vehicle and going out on the open road and finding it fun to drive. There will still be people competing in pretty much every form of racing, although probably every racing series is going to be less popular than it is now. I mean, almost every racing series is less popular than it was 10 or 20 years ago even, so this is already happening. But again, with all these things, just like with Donkey Kong and just like with autonomous cars, there are things that may eventually be considered out of date and like boutique and only a few people are interested in them, but people will still be going after records and everything. There will still be some demand. None of these things are going to go completely away, I don't think. And the same is going to hold true for typing, and that ties it back up. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I know what you mean with like typing. There's always going to be competitive typing because half the reason I type is just for the fun of it, which isn't a common thing, and I'm sure you can relate. I also want to ask, you also have a keen interest in Scrabble, is that correct?
Yes, I do, and that goes almost as far back as the typing. When I was 8 years old, a couple months short of 9 years old, I joined the Mensa Scrabble by Mail SIG, which mainly had U.S. members, occasionally a few Canadians and Australians. I am not a Mensa member. Both of my parents got into Mensa in the early 90s. But by the time I joined, the Mensa Scrabble by Mail SIG did not demand that you had to be a Mensa member to join the group. You only had to be a Mensa member to be the coordinator of the group or the editor of the newsletter. So I never joined. I never had any interest in joining. People think I'm much more arrogant and stuff like that than I am. I think a lot of those people, most of those people would be too snobby for me. I'm a lot more laid back than people think I am, I think. So I was never interested in joining in Mensa, but I was interested in joining the Scrabble group because my mom was a member of that group, both in the 70s and again in the 90s and 2000s. She rejoined. And I was playing one of my mom's games when I was 8 years old. She used to get them in the mail, and I used to rush in and open them and sometimes looked at the newsletters too. This was before I was even a member, and I found a better play than my mom did one time before I was even a member. She got kind of annoyed and asked if I wanted to play my own games just so I would stop looking at hers. I said yes, and so I joined the group. I was the youngest player in the history of that group, breaking the record of Robert Slavin, who later went on to become a 5-time Jeopardy champion, but he wasn't a great Scrabble player, and neither was I. Anyway, by the time I was 14, I was finally starting to beat some of the above average, like top 20 players in the group, and being competitive with even Dick Lazaro, who was the top ranked player in the group at the time and the 1986 Florida State Scrabble champion in tournament play. I became the statistician of the group when I was 14 years old. It was something I volunteered to do. They couldn't get anybody else, and I greatly expanded the statistics column at that time, which was usually about 5 pages at the time. I expanded that to be a 20-page column every other month or something, and I analyzed the games like no statistician before me had done, and I think that led me to improve a lot as a teenager, even though to some degree this group was contrived because the Scrabble by Mail group allowed people to use word books and word finders to find plays for them. That is not everything. That does not give you strategy, and you still need good strategy. There were a lot of people who used the electronic word finders and weren't very good at all. So I did improve a lot at strategy as a teenager, but I had embarrassingly not memorized as many words as I probably should have compared to some of the Scrabble prodigies who were coming up at the same time. But anyway, I did really improve a lot while I was statistician, and I'm statistician and ratings compiler of the group again, and I'm in the top 5 in the ratings, but there aren't nearly as many people as there used to be in the group, so that's not as impressive an accomplishment as it might have been during the 90s or something, when the group was a lot more popular. I did move on to legitimate tournament play in 2012. It took me forever just to be able to get to a tournament, but they did start having them in Syracuse in 2012 and 2013, and I finally became a legitimate tournament player. I'd played a lot of games, probably thousands of games, on the Internet Scrabble Club, which is a Romanian-run site that many of the top players on the world play on, and I'd gotten up to like an 1800 rating on there, which is really quite good. I'd memorized a lot of the important words even before I started, but I wasn't really up there at the expert level probably at that time either. But I did ascend really quickly from between 2012 and 2016, maybe. In what I believe was my third tournament, I beat Ben Schoenbrunn in the opening game, and then a month after that, Ben had an undefeated tournament and got a 2,000 rating. So he was maybe around his peak then, and I beat him. But there's so much luck in that doesn't mean a whole lot. I eventually won my first tournament in Webster, New York in the fall of 2015. I was playing in the Collins division in that tournament, which is the international dictionary that is used around the world. It's like the metric system. Almost the entire rest of the world has adapted the Collins Scrabble dictionary, but the US and Canada almost exclusively, and I think Thailand for some bizarre reason haven't. They all use the original US dictionary. But almost everybody has US and Collins tournaments now, but US and Canada are now split between two dictionaries. I've played them both. I seem to be better at playing with the International Dictionary. I won my second tournament with the International Dictionary, although there were only 4 people in that division, and that got me up to a 1700 rating, which was about 60th or something in Collins, and when counting both dictionaries, maybe I'm around 130th or 140th in the United States. I'm gonna look this up to be more precise.
Mm-hmm.
My current tournament word list rating, which is the U.S. dictionary, is 1585. My current Collins rating is 1722, which is 61st in the Collins dictionary. Crosstables.com combines both dictionaries onto the same list and ranks people based on whichever dictionary they're higher in. And on the entire United States list, I am ranked 144th right now. I did make a few really great finds, 9-letter bingos I found in plays. There was one time when I had the letters TI were on the board, and the word T, the 7th note of the do-re-mi scale, and I played flotillas through it with 2 blanks, which is a hard thing to find, but another word with a sexual connotation that has nearly the same letters scored higher. That joke writes itself, but I'm trying to keep it for a family-friendly audience.
Mm-hmm.
But you can guess what the word is.
Mm-hmm.
And in an internet game against Nigel Peltier, who is actually a really obsessed type racer user also, and has done a lot more races on there than I have, and he is good. He has beaten me a few times, although I've beaten him at Scrabble a few more times. There's more luck in Scrabble, probably, than in type racer. In a 3-minute blitz game, we played 3 minutes per side online. You're only allowed to go over a minute more than that, or else you automatically forfeit even if you're leading. I found broadened, making 5 overlap, extending from ED already on the board with a B as a blank. It was the only bingo on the board, and it was a really fast game, and that was a good find too. And perhaps of some notes, as I was playing a type racer user at least, and I played Crepitant, Crepitant. I don't even remember what it means. I remember the word being mentioned in the Scrabble memoir Word Freak, though. I played that through RE and Ray, the 2nd note, and that was the only bingo on the board. And in that game, I was having trouble opening my eyes because I was having some weird eye condition at the time where I often woke up unable to open my eyes. They were getting stuck. That healed, thankfully, but that was particularly impressive, finding that almost blind. Those are the 3 that I was proud of and decided to share.
Yeah.
I guess they were okay anecdotes, but I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, wow. These stories are amazing, Sean. I better get out this Scrabble board sometime and play with my family. Fantastic. So now we want to lead into this a few sort of fun questions, I call them, because they're not particularly related to Scrabble or typing at all, but it's questions I ask all my guests. So I've just got a few here for you, Sean, and you can pass on some if you want. It's completely up to you. But the first one here is, what is something you believe that other people think is insane?
I've come to the conclusion that college is largely worthless. I was unemployed a lot of the time after getting my master's degree at Cornell in applied statistics. I was unemployed at the time I won the Ultimate Typing Championship contest, and for about a year and a half afterward. And I never really landed the professional jobs that a lot of people would have expected. And I've come to the conclusion that most of that pretty much comes down to one's social skills more than one's academic skills. They will take the most suitably proficient candidates who have the best academic skills among the people who are considered socially skilled enough. But if you're not socially skilled enough, it's easy to be kind of lost. And I see college as mainly some sort of proxy for some kind of academic potential, or how hard you're willing to work or whatever, that I can understand why people like to see it, but I'm really wishing in retrospect I had not gone into 6 figures of debt to do it. And this is becoming a increasingly more common opinion, but there are a lot of people who still do find me too hardline when I say things, which I admit are hyperbolic about how social skills basically mean anything and almost any other kind of skills mean nothing, it seems to me that intellectual type skills have almost never been less valued. There's always a niche of people who are into things, but it seems to me that after the media was deregulated around the world and after the internet became mainstream, both of those things contributed to essentially the loudest screamer winning on almost every topic. And I mean, now it's reflected in the media, and it's reflected in politics, and it's probably reflected in almost all the arts, and it's kind of depressing to me. I think a lot of people will agree with a lot of what I said there, but I think most people would still refute my argument that college is almost essentially worthless. I think the people who succeed out of college are highly motivated that they would have succeeded regardless. And I see especially in the high-tech worlds, people in Silicon Valley, people like Paul Graham think that going to college, unless you go to a really elite college, is basically worthless when you should be spending time obsessing over the skills that are demanded in the workplace. I agree with half the stuff Graham says. I totally disagree with half the stuff he says. I have a love-hate relationship with his writing, but I do really agree with a lot of that, and I don't think most people right now really do think college is worthless, and I guess that is one of my most quote-unquote insane opinions.
Yeah, it's funny. We could go down that path, because it's actually a theme that's coming up in my podcast in the future with a few guests I'm speaking to. And I was actually a college dropout myself. Halfway through, I dropped out, and I've been cultivating my skills on my own since, just because I'm seeing this massive shift here in 2017. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there preaching that, well, not a lot, but it's slowly coming into fruition, the idea that college is insane. So I think you will have a minority that do agree with you, but obviously I think there are people that are doing college now, and college is all they've ever known, that may disagree with you. But, that's what life is. Some people agree, some people disagree. But anyway, I'll move on to the next question, Sean. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. So what purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life that you bought in the last 12 months?
Well, I guess it would be one or two things, and they were both in the past 2 or 3 months. I'm not very rich now. I mean, I do have a steady job now, thankfully, so I've moved on to lower middle class basically, but I don't buy a lot of big ticket items very often, but I did buy this webcam for about $50 on eBay, this Logitech C920, I think it is, gaming webcam, and I just finally uploaded a couple of YouTube videos using that, where people finally got to see me typing with my fingers on the keyboard non-stop for an hour in my last 2 videos. Wow. And finally that makes a lot of my typing records, including the ones I just set on 10 fast fingers. That's why I bought this, to verify some 10 fast fingers records in all kinds of languages. I set them in a bunch of different languages. Generally only the ones without foreign accents. I do worse with foreign accents, and it would take me a while probably to set the records in those languages that have them, although I could learn the US International Keyboard really quickly. Apparently using the US International Keyboard, all you have to do is type an apostrophe either before or after you type the A, E, I, O, or U to get an acute accent, and probably something else to get a grave accent. So maybe I would be really fast in that, but I haven't really explored it yet. But I did set almost all the records for the languages that don't have accent marks except for Dutch. Matthias Scholl is really good in Dutch, and he's actually broken some of my English records on Typer A and on 10 fast fingers. He's probably one of the best English language types that nobody's talking about. So yeah, that was a good purchase, even though my second video was not so fortunate, because I used that to record the Intersteno Internet Typing Contest. I do type that every year. I used to type 15 languages in that, and I won the multilingual contest in 2011 and 2012. I won the mother tongue contest, just typing my own language, every year since 10, except 2012 and 2014, and I set my highest score ever on that contest this year in 2017. But just a couple days ago, I was informed that I was disqualified from the contest for putting up this YouTube video before the contest had ended, because theoretically it would have allowed somebody to look at the English text and cheat off it. I don't believe anybody actually did this. It's kind of a technicality to me, and I was being totally oblivious. I didn't even think of somebody using it to cheat. I don't even think of cheating. And I don't think anybody used it to cheat, but I understand the ruling. I accept it. It makes sense to me. It led to Mark Kislingbury, who holds the Guinness World Record, or the most recent one for stenotyping, winning his first contest. I actually beat the stenotype world record holder the last 2 years on the Intersteno contest, but he ended up winning because I was disqualified here. And that's fine. I've won so many of those. I'm just a little disappointed if I hurt any of the officials' feelings doing that. I certainly didn't mean to do that. I was just being oblivious, not recognizing the ramifications of that. But it was still a good purchase. It was still good to watch me typing over 170 words per minute on that for 10 minutes straight or something. And I think that ultimately holds more value for posterity, even though I was disqualified for the contest anyway. And also, I bought that membership to newspapers.com for 6 months, which was also less than $100, where I can look at newspaper archives for hundreds of different newspapers going back like even into the 1800s and so on.
Wow.
So that's where I'm doing a lot of my recent research on typing history. I mentioned that I'm interested in writing a book on the history of typing, and that's why I rattled off all these people who set all these records, and that's why I've been sending out all these Guinness books and stuff, just to find out all the people I need to research. So I've been able to find a lot of anecdotes about a lot of the most famous typists from earlier decades. That a lot of this stuff isn't on the internet yet, but it is appearing in these old newspapers. I mean, there was a time when newspapers collectively probably rivaled the internet in knowledge. I mean, that's definitely not the case now, but in past decades it was. And I was amazed how big typing contests were in previous decades. In the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, the biggest stars, who were Albert Tangora, George Hosfield, and to a lesser degree, Cortez Peters, were talked about a lot in the media, like hundreds of citations. And in the Keytronic contest where Wayne Stoller won $10,000, there was still a bit. It made the Associated Press. There were still maybe 30 or 40 newspapers covering it. By the time we got to the contest I won and the contest Robert Price won, it was only one newspaper mentioning either of us, and Robert Price's name was listed as Richard Price. So newspapers stopped caring, but this used to be huge and mainstream in the newspapers. Now it's kind of mainstream on the internet, but it's an interesting disconnect between what's huge on the internet and what's huge on the print press. Like, I don't really care whether I have a Wikipedia profile or not. Somebody did make a Wikipedia profile for me. It was later deleted. I don't really care. I don't really want that kind of press. But it's kind of interesting that Albert Tangora, based on all those old newspapers, is considered notable, and nobody in the current typing scene is, because so many of these things are seen of as unverifiable. But as I've seen from what I've done, the research I've done looking at the Guinness records, a lot of the Guinness World Record holders, even if they were verifiable, they weren't, especially recently, they weren't necessarily the fastest people. They were just the people who had official backing, and a lot of that can get political and stuff. So there's a lot of interesting stuff here comparing the scenes in typing history. A lot of people have written books about the typewriter era, but nobody's really talked about the era after the typewriter contest stopped, which was shortly after World War II. And I think there might be some interest if I wrote a book connecting the typewriter era, the internet era, and the era in between, when there wasn't a lot going on, but there were still people who were setting records then. And I would also use such a book to discuss whatever I've learned about my own typing methods. It's only like very recently, in the past couple months, I've learned very much about my own typing style and how it differed from other people's. Like, seeing what keystrokes I'm the fastest on and what the most important keys are and stuff like that. That's new to me, and I'm not sure there's been a lot written about that either, so I'd certainly include stuff like that in such a book as well. But it's interesting how styles changed too. Albert Tangora was the best typist in the 30s and 40s, I guess. I mean, I mentioned he said it. He record of 147 words per minute on a mechanical typewriter in an hour, and he had some very unusual views of what mattered in typing. He would only type on desks that were situated 29 inches off the floor. He had a specific record, like he was some stereotypical Big Bang Theory character or something. And he also felt that a lot of types of motion helped in his typing. Like, he thought that swing dancing was essential to becoming a better typist, which is another view that would be seen as rather odd today. In fact, I've noticed athleticism doesn't really matter in typing at all. People say that it does, it doesn't. Both Cortez Peters and his son, who were two of the fastest typists in history, without question. Cortez Peters Jr. is probably who I would pick as the fastest typist in history. They were both noticeably overweight. Some of the very fastest people now are overweight. I'm not athletic at all. I have no motor skills except for typing. It's not a form of athletics. I mean, there might be someday somebody will want to call it an e-sport, but I really wouldn't. It's a different kind of talent. It has nothing to do with it. Now, here's the thing. That doesn't mean that because it's not a sport that people should mock it because it's not a sport any more than they should mock elite chess players or Scrabble players or Magic the Gathering or people who win memory contests or whatever. It's a shame that we, at least in the U.S., maybe it's not global anymore. I think in Asia, people are respected for non-athletic skill-based tasks more. They treat chess champions and spelling bee winners, even Indian Americans who were born in the U.S. get hyped. Spelling bee winners in the U.S. get hyped, even if they weren't born in India. They get hyped big time in Indian papers, which I find kind of strange. But so it's not really a form of athleticism. So I think Albert Tangora was very wrong about swing dancing being a big factor. Cortez Peters wasn't very athletic, and he was only 2 words per minute or something slower than Tangora. He was just as fast, and Peters is more respected today by a lot of people than even Tangora is. Tangora also believed that typing at the elite level was exclusively a male pursuit, and that is totally wrong. Stella Paginus Garnand, who set the fastest 1-minute typing speed on an electric typewriter, in the 1940s, did 216 words per minute in an entire minute. I eventually broke that on 10 fast fingers with 220 words per minute, but I'm betting the text that she typed was harder. And typing on an electric typewriter is probably also harder, typing on a regular keyboard also. And because on 10 fast fingers, you're just typing something like the top 1,000 most popular words, and most of them are in lowercase, and it's probably not as hard as typing regular sentences or whatever over an entire minute, which is what Stella was doing. So I might be more impressed with that one. And Kathy Chang, who just broke my record of 256 words per minute on TypeRacer with a 276, is another good example. Barbara Blackburn typed 150 words per minute over 50 minutes. Another good example. This isn't like chess. There have been considerably fewer female grandmasters. Many of the all-time greats in typing have been women, so Albert Tangora was rather full of it with his opinions of the time, but I know a lot of people had opinions like that at that time too. But yeah, I've uncovered a lot of interesting stuff, I guess, and sure, most of that would go in such a book if I was writing. So yes, getting this webcam and getting the subscription to this newspaper site have likely been very helpful in me providing evidence or gaining knowledge on things.
Yeah, fantastic. What is your favorite documentary or movie, and why?
My favorite movie is Field of Dreams. I'm a sucker for sentimental stuff. I'm not really fond of the edgier, darker fare that most of the other millennials obsess over. Things like Pulp Fiction and Fight Club kind of make me want to vomit. There's another unpopular opinion for you, because I know almost every one of my peers enjoys those movies, but I really don't enjoy embracing nihilism. I seek things that are hopeful or joyful. I'm a very depressed person myself, and I think that's what drives this. I don't need to see depression and nihilism. I mean, there's a difference between evaluating how good you think something is and how it emotionally affects you. And unfortunately, too many people seem to get those confused. And so I can acknowledge that Pulp Fiction was the most influential movie of the 90s. Of course it was. I still hate it. Field of Dreams does hit all my emotional buttons with regard to empathy or whatever, even though I don't even care about baseball and never really did. The emotions on that are powerful and heartwarming to me and whatever, but it's something ineffable, not very easy to explain either, especially if you're autistic. I mean, it is sort of weird that an autistic person would pick something like that instead of, I don't know, something more cliche like Star Wars or Back to the Future or something, and I like those fine too, but yeah, for me, it's Field of Dreams, and my favorite documentary is Spellbound, about the people in the 1999 National Spelling Bee. I was not too far away from actually making the 1999 Spelling Bee, although they only selected 8 people for the movie. I probably wouldn't have been selected even if I'd made it. But I finished 6th in the Syracuse Regional that year that movie was filmed, and the winner went on to Washington and the National Spelling Bee, although she wasn't interviewed either. But it's possible I would have been freakish enough for them that I would have been one of the people they were interested in. I don't know. But it was a really good documentary, and I love that as well.
I see. And another thing I'm curious about, Sean, is feel free to disclose as little or as much as you want. It's completely up to you. I'm just curious about Asperger's syndrome, because you did say you're sort of on the autistic scale. And so I'm just wondering, what that is, or what that means for you, and how does it impact your daily life?
I think the biggest way it affected me was in my eating habits. I have an obscure eating disorder called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, where I've only eaten about 10 or 20 things for most of my life, the same things day after day, most of them not healthy. I mean, I gag specific things that are unfamiliar tastes that are just normal things. I gagged like turkey and soup and corn and other things. I have almost the worst eating habits in the entire world, and that is something that is linked to autism a lot, and that is probably the way it is most affected to my life. I mean, my health has rapidly deteriorated in some ways in the past few years, and I'm sure that's what's driving that. So that was probably the biggest thing. Socialization, not so much. I feel like I have enough friends. I've made friends in the typing community and in the Scrabble community and in the racing community. I've found niche support all over the place. I do have a tendency of being too outspoken. You probably already noticed that here. Mm-hmm. And that's also linked with autism. I've alienated people in the typing, racing, and Scrabble communities too, and that's what hurts. That's what stings. But I am satisfied with the friendships I've made, even if my social skills aren't great. And now I have a job. I have a job that people with my limited level of social skills can get. I mean, I didn't land anything glamorous, but that's okay. I have enough glamorous stuff in my life with the typing and the websites I've made and being a tournament Scrabble expert or whatever. I can have glamour in my free time. I don't need some snazzy finance computer science job like everybody would have expected of me when I was, earlier on. So I'm a little depressed sometimes about not having met those sort of expectations, but I've distinguished myself in enough ways. I just honestly wish now I'd gotten less attention because of how many people pick on me, which is way more percentage-wise than I was even picked on in high school, where I think I was more respected for my talents than rejected for them, which was very contrary to the nerd stereotypes you saw in the media in those decades, but true in my case.
Yeah, I think you're an incredible person, which is exactly why I've brought you on the podcast. I'm just amazed. I'm going to take some time out after this call just to reflect on what we've talked about. It's quite amazing. So thanks for sharing that, Sean. So we'll because my YouTube channel is called 1% Better, the whole idea behind a lot of these interviews, where I try to stay on topic, is to take something away from it that can make our lives 1% better, because we're all in self-development. And I think you've got a massive, I know you've got a massive skill set behind you. So I'm curious, the last question is, if there was one thing we could take away from this talk we have to make our lives 1% better, or increase our typing skills or our skill sets, it can be anything, to make it 1% better, what would it be, Sean?
Well, here's a weird coincidence for you. Right now I'm reading a book called Peak that I think was a bestseller from a year or two ago by, I forget his first name, Anders Ericsson, and he had a co-author.
Wow. Just to cut you off real quickly, Sean, I'm sorry. Just cutting you off real quickly. What's even more of a coincidence is that out of all the books I could have read, that is the book I'm reading right now. Isn't that incredible? Anyway, Sean, go on.
No, I'm not surprised because it fits right with the podcast you're running.
That's true.
You need to be informed on that sort of thing if you're going to do this right. But yes, I am also reading Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. This was recommended to me by somebody in the Type Racer Discord chat room, and I like a lot of these sort of nonfiction books. Now, there are many of the acclaimed ones that I hate. I think Freakonomics is awful, even though it's hugely acclaimed.
Yeah,
I do not just kiss the critics' butts on these things. Freakonomics was bad. Moneyball was good. Moonwalking with Einstein, which was a book that was not as talked about as many of those other ones, was very good. And Peak is of the same caliber. And the guy who wrote Moonwalking with Einstein and the guy who wrote Peak, they were apparently consulting each other, and they were both quoted in each other's books. They were very similar. Moonwalking with Einstein was about how to teach yourself to have a better memory, and he used a lot of Ericsson's tips, and Ericsson was one of his advisors in how to eventually win the U.S. Memory Championship, Joshua 4, and that was a much more enjoyable book for me than his much more famous brother, Jonathan Safran Foer's Everything is Illuminated, which I could not make it through. But I am enjoying Peak in the same vein as Moonwalking with Einstein, and that book is about how to teach yourself to purposefully practice things, because practice in and of itself does not make you improve unless you practice by finding the things that you are bad at within a given task and improving in them. And the book also goes on about how willpower isn't really a thing, and hard work in and of itself as a general concept isn't really a thing. You can be hardworking towards a specific discipline or not, but it doesn't necessarily apply to other disciplines. I mean, that's the same thing with me in typing. I am terribly physically unfit, fitting all stereotypes in that way, but I'm elite in typing. They have nothing to do with each other. One's ability, you don't have a general level of intellect, or you don't have a general level of knowledge, really. You just have areas of knowledge, areas of expertise, areas of talent in each individual skill set. And that's basically what that book is about, and I am enjoying it. I'm not remotely through it yet. I did skip around. I didn't read chapters in order, but because I looked at a lot of the stuff I'm interested in, typing in Scrabble and spelling and whatever first, and those were mentioned in the book. It's a good book, but honestly, the things I care most about aren't any of those sort of skills. I think the most important things are the things that aren't measurable. The most important things are having empathy for your fellow human beings, and that's where I struggle a lot of times. A lot of us autistic people do struggle with empathy, understanding how other people feel. I'm too abrasive a lot of the time. I alienate people a lot of the time, and I mean, thinking back to that typing video, the most famous image of me is people thinking I'm supremely arrogant for saying I expected to win because I was the fastest on those typing sites, when people who know me in real life know how self-loathing I am most of the time. I have a history on Type Racer or on all sorts of typing sites of assuming people are faster than me if they match my speeds early on, and then usually they never do. A few people have passed my top speeds, but that's it. But I assume everybody's going to be faster, everybody who emerges. I've assumed people who were eventually caught cheating were actually faster than me in real life. And it, ties into how self-loathing I am. So people who watch this video totally have it wrong. In an era when it seems like the loudest voices win and fewer people seem to be interested in listening to nuanced arguments on anything, I'm obsessing more with nuance and understanding, how people think, philosophical, sociological, psychological ideas. I mean, I haven't read most of the great works in any of that stuff yet, but that's where my brain is leading lately. I want to have empathy for people. All of these things. Okay, it's fun to be the supposed world's fastest typist, and I still don't even believe it, because I believe there are people in the abstract who are probably faster who just don't care. They just care about more important things. What really matters is the empathy you have for human beings and people who disagree with you, and not just snarking at them like you see on YouTube or a lot of places on Reddit. I'm not saying any of these sites are awful. There's good stuff on YouTube, there's good stuff on Reddit, there's good stuff everywhere, but it seems like the most popular stuff inevitably seems to be people snarking and making inside jokes at each other. I just read David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest and most of his nonfiction book, A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, and I've been really against irony and snark and people just making ironic, whimsical, snarky, obnoxious comments at each other. People who are very well informed who just believe that saying something ironically without really any meaning or empathy or just insulting people is like the meaning of life. It like gives them joie de vivre or something, and it disgusts me. So that led me directly to Wallace's work. Now there's a lot of stuff in Infinite Jest. I don't think every single word of it is a masterpiece. I think the people who say that are bizarre. There are stupid plots in that, but the themes he deals with are so amazing and did predict a lot of the decline in internet discourse I've seen throughout my life. And it seems there was more empathy in the past than there has been since the internet, with loudest voices winning, fewer people, even fewer intellectual people wanting to listen to nuances. Most just want to snark at each other. And I think empathy is what we all need to improve on, but if I can explain how to do that, I can't because I'm autistic, but I know that that's what really matters. Being the fastest typist doesn't matter. Being the best chess player doesn't matter. Even being the president or whatever doesn't matter in the cosmic sense. So empathy is what everybody needs to work on, but of course anything relating to that cannot possibly be measurable, so it wouldn't really apply to any of these books, like even the good ones like Peak or Moonwalking with Einstein or whatever. So, but yeah. Empathy, love is what I would say, but easier said than done.
Yeah, definitely. And what they call emotional intelligence, which involves empathy, is a big topic that's coming up.
Yes, I like Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence book too. That was really good also.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic, isn't it? And it's actually my second most viewed video on my YouTube channel with almost 250,000 views, because this is a rising topic that EQ is more important in this world than IQ today. So it's really interesting you bring that up, Sean. You've mentioned a lot of books, including Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which is on my to-read list, actually. I'm really curious about that. So out of all the books you've read, what actually is your favorite book and why?
I don't really have a favorite book like I have a favorite movie. I don't really have a favorite musical artist either. I tend to think of those the same ways. Different ways. I do tend to enjoy reading nonfiction more than fiction, although I do enjoy a lot of both, and I do find a lot of nonfiction and a lot of fiction insipid. I mean, anything can be good, anything can be bad. Just because something's nonfiction doesn't make it better than fiction. Just because something's fiction doesn't make it better than nonfiction. Just because something has juvenile themes doesn't make it worse than something that has ambitious themes. I mean, Infinite Jest has much more ambitious themes, for instance, than something like Harry Potter does, but I think Harry Potter succeeds at what it's doing better than Infinite Jest succeeds at what it's doing, because Infinite Jest doesn't end and has a lot of really stupid subplots about terrorists in wheelchairs. He could have left that stuff out. I don't think that's nearly as funny as he does, but so when you're trying to evaluate things, there are different things for different purposes. And some things give you emotional reactions, some things are just about nuanced arguments, some things are just about for fun, and movies, the way I see it, are always an emotional thing. Books are not. So I can say Field of Dreams is my favorite movie, but picking a favorite book out of several is just significantly harder, and not something I would really do for that reason, because different things suit different moods. Probably what I most connect to is the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, which isn't really a book, but he did do everything from profound themes to juvenile themes, and Watterson, I think, did a better job of keeping that totally consistent than David Foster Wallace, who was trying to do the same sort of thing in literature. Like, half of Infinite Jest is completely juvenile and half of it's profound, and it's hard to tell which half is which half. I don't think it's as successful as that Calvin and Hobbes is, but calling Calvin and Hobbes my favorite book, it's not really a book either, and I don't know, there's lots of things I like, but just picking one over the other, it just depends on what you're looking for, whereas in movies, I think it's always about an emotional argument, so I guess that's the difference there.
Alright, thanks for that. We'll keep that in mind. And so, to wrap up, I know you're sort of conflicted on the prospect of being, in the spotlight, so I'll leave it up to you how you answer it, but what I ask all my guests is, where can we find you on the world of the internet to find out more about you?
I guess I would prefer people go to my eponymous website, SeanWrona.com, and go to the typing page there. I also have pages on Scrabble and my racing obsession and some of my earlier obsessions in grade school. I also have pages on that stuff, so that basically summarizes my life and most of what I talked about here. And I mean, I did even consult that for a few things I vaguely remember, even though I wrote all that. So I guess that would be the first place. And I mean, I do provide links to my Twitter and my YouTube account and stuff. I mean, people aren't that bad to me on Twitter and YouTube, really. It's only the public YouTube videos that were put up for the Ultimate Typing Championship because they gained a level of mainstream press. They weren't quite memes, but the 6 million view one almost was. And that's where I got most of the nasty comments, and that's why that would be almost the last place I'd direct someone, but my site's fine, my YouTube channel's fine, my Twitter's account's fine. I deactivated my Facebook profile a few months ago, and I'm not interested in rejoining that, but I'm almost everywhere else.
Alright, fantastic, Sean. We'll leave it there then. So I just want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise. It's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you again, Sean.
You're welcome.
If you'd like 3 gold nuggets from the book I'm currently reading, packed into a short, entertaining, weekly email, then head to brandonnankivell.com/subscribe. This is also the best way to interact with me and keep up with what I'm doing. Again, head to brandonnankivell.com/subscribe. As usual, thank you for listening, my friends. I release new episodes every week. Make sure you don't miss one by subscribing. It's super easy and means a lot to me. Go to iTunes, search for The 1% Show, and click subscribe. Once again, I'm your host, Brandon Nankivell, and I'll see you in the next episode.